is your favorite character? I bet at least one name popped up in your head right now. Why do you like that character? Do you relate to them in some way? There's a pretty big chance that you do. Your favorite character says something about you, mainly because they are more like you than you might think. As people, we are pretty self centered and not necessarily in a bad way. We tend to like talking about ourselves or being the topic of the conversation. We like things that are about us. In psychology, there is something called the self-reference effect. It means that we are better and faster in processing stimuli that are related to us. Things like our name, face, identity, and experiences. Information that is related to those factors are easier for us to process, memorize, and recall. In practice, this means that it's easier for us to learn new material when it relates to our personal experiences. For example, it was fairly easy for me to learn the main story of Damian Wayne because certain parts were relatable to me. It's also easier for us to process information based on our identity. A great example is this. Imagine you're at a Comic Con talking to your friends and suddenly you hear someone else say your name. You weren't paying attention to any other conversation or you weren't eavesdropping, but you were still able to recognize your own name in someone else's conversation. This is called the cocktail party effect. A similar phenomenon happens when we watch or read media. We become absorbed in the plot and we tend to identify with the characters. So, what does your favorite characters say about you? Our favorite characters are basically us. A 2023 study found that people are more likely to favor characters with similar traits as their own. Gregory Webster, a psychology professor at the University of Florida, explained this by saying that people form parasocial relationships with their favorite character, and if they like a character, it's because of what they see of themselves. We identify with characters. Identification is an imaginative process through which an audience member assumes the identity, goal, and perspective of a character. This is closely related to the self-discrepancy theory. This theory was created by Torrey Higgins in 1987. Torrey stated that there are three basic domains of the self. First, there is the actual self. This is the representation of who you actually are. Then there's the ideal self. The ideal self is the representation of who you would like to be. This can include wishes, aspirations, and so on. Lastly, there is the odd self. This is the representation of attributes we believe we should possess, such as obligations and responsibilities. These last two are also referred to as our self-guides. Fictional characters we like fall into one of these three domains. When our favorite character falls in the odd self, they tend to give us a sense of validation, but this doesn't happen very often. When they're part of the ideal self, we tend to idolize certain traits we feel we lack. Through media, we can borrow those traits and experience what is called self-expansion. Self-expansion basically means the motivation we have to continuously learn and broaden our identity and skills. Characters who portray our ideal self can motivate us to grow and become a better version of ourselves. This effect increases when the character also shows similarities to the viewer's actual self. This is more common. Our favorite characters represent our actual self. This makes it easy for us to identify with them. Now, you guys know I'm a cosplayer, and interestingly, a 2018 study reveals that cosplayers choose which character to cosplay based on their ideal self and their actual self. So cosplayers are exposing their own identity and ideal personality through the characters they cosplay. It's clear we identify with our favorite characters, and this can happen because of three main reasons. The first one is similarity. This means the audience relates to the character or their situation. Then there is the willingness to be like the character, which is what we just discussed in the ideal self. At last, there is the feeling of empathy for the character's emotions and perspective. So just like we choose favorite characters based on their traits, We also choose them for their relatable emotions and experiences. This process is called emotional projection, and it is deeply human. If you've experienced grave loneliness, you may be more drawn to characters who are also more isolated. It's clear we don't relate to characters because they're perfectly written, but because they feel familiar. There was a study done in 2021 that found correlations between attachment styles and favorite characters. In short, avoidant people tend to prefer characters who are autonomous, independent, and a bit avoidant themselves. Anxiously attached people, oddly enough, don't tend to significantly prefer warm characters, but rather characters who put others' needs above their own and who want to please others. When we are able to relate to the emotional experience of a character, it allows us to process and regulate our own emotions. Identification is important because of its contribution to the development of our identity and sense of self. Identifying with fictional characters allows us to experience reality from different perspectives, and it can make us feel validated in how we feel. So far, we've concluded that identifying with fictional characters happens because they represent a version of ourselves, the ideal version of ourselves, and because we relate to them on an emotional level. But identifying with fictional characters also has consequences for you. Because you share motives, values, or certain traits, you are more likely to be persuaded by them or adopt some of their other traits. According to the learning theory by Bandura, identification can lead to modeling and imitating behavior. When we look up to someone and see them behave in a certain way, we are more likely to show the same type of behavior. If you are a fan of superheroes, you are also more likely to learn or exhibit more morally good behavior. This was tested using Harry Potter. Personally, I have never read a Harry Potter book, but apparently there is some prejudice towards other people, also referred to as muggles. Harry values these characters and fights for a world free from prejudice. Interestingly, researchers from this 2015 study have shown that identifying more with positive characters like Harry Potter reduces prejudice towards groups that are often discriminated against in real life, like immigrants and refugees. This effect is also present in morally ambiguous characters. Researchers found that children behave more violently after seeing a morally ambiguous character act aggressively compared to purely bad characters behaving in the same way. So Bandura's learning theory is correct in both positive and negative behavior, but it is less present when the villain is pure evil. This is because people tend to prefer characters who are more realistic. For example, some people dislike Superman because, according to them, he has too many good features and this makes him less realistic. To those people, I suggest they watch Smallville, but I digress. As humans, we're not perfect. We all make mistakes. None of us are purely good. Studies suggest that audiences perceive purely good characters as less like themselves, resulting in them liking the character less. It also explains why people really dislike the typical Mary Sue characters. They have a lot of good features and they rarely struggle. It's not realistic and therefore it's not like ourselves. We have negative traits. But what happens when people also think very negatively about themselves? Besides relating to characters, we also tend to project our own personality traits on characters. For example, people who see themselves as narcissistic are more likely to see more characters as narcissistic as well. People who freely admit to traits with negative connotations tend to project those traits onto others. It can make them feel less odd about it. In addition, identifying with extremely negative characters who are evil or very violent may evoke some understanding or even sympathy for them when consuming the media they're in. But strongly identifying with such a character may cause dissonance, guilt, or even fear. In conclusion, we are our favorite characters. Our favorite characters tend to be a representation of ourselves and how we want to be. These characters tend to be realistic or even morally ambiguous. Our favorite characters influence our behavior and they can help us process our emotions and life events. However, we also don't like to feel like the odd one out, so we tend to project our own negative traits and emotions onto the fictional characters. If you want to know more about how fictional characters can affect us, I suggest you watch this video next. Thank you so much for being here, and I will see you in the next video. Bye!